ungodly, with an intelligence quotient exceeding numerology. Scholar body honorary, school of prophet alum, anthropomorphized lessons so I could become the heartbeat of righteousness, the everyday fight to pump the blood of kings, breathe the breath of life, moving up like Confederates in Yankee territories in the 17th century. But it's a thin line between divinity and iniquity. Mason Dixon hitting incantation decisions, division between symptoms of a phenom and a psychopath, gifted and asinine. I won't erase that vertical line on an incline that divides them. Climbing out this box in my mind, it's like having altitude sickness on alpine expedition. Genius vision never fixed in on the depth below. Focus on elevation where others never dare to go. And brainiacs ain't contained in that receptacle. Incredible creative energy becomes perceptible. The cerebral can be an evil alter ego, a true pal, and you shall become legendary and futile. Development of a god. I sleep between dates on the calendar. Can't escape a date with a challenger. Now that's a blind date in the field division, but my other senses reveal I'm winning. Yeah. The thin line, thin line, thin line. Mastermind, man of the master. Which one of you after?
Welcome to the green side of things. It's your man Sadeek, and I am in the studio with my man Zarakia Amadi El, sitting in for the one and only Cassiopeia Uhuru. We need you to like, comment, and share this lunch table experience. We need you to come on in the room. Happy to have you with us, my brother. How are you?
I'm good, bro. Appreciate you for having me on today.
Yeah. So you can go ahead and loosen up. If you can't tell, Zarakia just left the gym. And so he's got his, I just lifted 225 pounds face on, but he can go ahead and loosen up today. You were real serious, right? I was like, is he going to be all right? But I think it happens at the top of each show. We need you guys to come on in this room. Hey, what's happening, T? Glad to see you out there. Facebook Live. See you out there, Dennis. Thank you for dropping in. YouTube, please like, comment, share. We have a great show, a great historical discussion for you today. I want to put that at the top of the list today. We're going to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're going to talk about the current issues there, but we're also going to have a discussion historically, and no better discussion to have than somebody who's actually in Israel, the Holy Land, the Middle East. We're going to get to some of all of these terms today because, you know, to me, it seems like they've been fighting in what they call the Middle East or in Israel/Palestine, like since I was born. Yeah. And I was born in 1970. So there's a news story like every 6 months, every couple years about a potential conflict. I guess this is the most volatile it's been, I guess, in maybe 8-9 years over there.
Roundabout since the second intifada.
Right, something like that. So we're going to talk about it today. So guys, we need you to go ahead and reach out, bring some people around the lunch table, because other than what the U.S. media gives us, it's fair to say, do we really know much about this conflict? Who the people are, why they're fighting. So we won't be able to get to all of it today, but we want you to come on in the room, share the broadcast with some people. Hey, what's going on, Hodiah? We see you out there today. Appreciate you for stopping in. Again, we need you to like, share, and comment on the broadcast. Let us know that you're out there. So Zarakia, talk to us, man. You out there in the streets. You work with the youth. I know you're working on some big things. You got some proprietary drinks that should be coming to the market. So tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world.
Well, yeah, you know, I've been working on the West Side with Cameron Elementary School. I'm the restorative practices coordinator there and the trauma-informed services coordinator through Blocks Together. So just another avenue to share and research sustainable interventions to deal with trauma. You know, I think trauma is a matter of our time, particularly for people, I mean, like people of color, Black and brown people in America in particular. We're traumatized on so many levels, and I think that has stunted our output and evolution. So to be able to deal with that in a sustainable and effective way should be, well, that's my focus. And so, you know, that's allowed me to, I think, frankly, the major work I've done in the past month has been to deal with Jaslyn Adams' family. Jaslyn was one of our students.
Okay, and tell us a little bit for those who aren't familiar with the Jasmine Adams story.
Sure. So Jasmine, of course, the 6-year-old who was shot, became a big story. She was riding in the car with her father at McDonald's, and some cats came up and sprayed the car. And, of course, the controversy that came outside of that. But the unfortunate part, and I saw it from the inside, that it's almost likened to the Arab-Israeli thing, that once things become so monotonous, we get used to it, we start to see the humanity and have compassion for the individuals who are being affected. So I watched when the father started doing interviews, and there was questions about his character. I watched the children kind of get lost in the shuffle, like to the point that funerals that were going to be paid for weren't being paid for. I mean, it just became a mess. And so
Wow.
I've just been honored to be able to work directly with her siblings who are still alive and being affected, her mother, even to a lesser extent the father, and try to bring some kind of peace and healing to that situation. Other than that, we're just going to see the same cycle over and over again.
Got it. Now, I'm sure you might be bound by some type of confidentiality, obviously, because, working with trauma or in a therapist role or in a counselor's role. But is everybody in the situation kind of getting what they need, or is it even a fight to get them what they need based on the trauma that the family has been and is experiencing?
Well, thankfully, myself and Blocks Together was there. Just really the school community came together in a way that was really profound to help the family. I think, frankly, what happens in these situations is that whether the resources are there, particularly black and brown people are so impacted by shame that we don't seek out those resources, or if the resources are there, we don't take the steps to actualize them, because there's this internal narrative that we're not worthy of healing, we're not worthy of joy, success, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that's kind of been the main challenge. The good thing about the children are still children, so there's some innocence that they haven't been entirely damaged by that thought yet, And I had some really special moments with Jonte. We were actually on our way to one of the vigils. And before we left, it was him, his sisters, cousins, a whole room full of kids and aunties and whatnot. And before we left, Jonte kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, can we do the butterfly hug?" And the butterfly hug is a self-soothing technique I taught the kids.
Yeah. We've done it on the show. You've shown us on the show.
Right, we talked about it.
I'm getting ready to butterfly right now.
Well, you look kind of funny when you're doing it. But,
Thank you.
but no, so Jonte wanted to do it. I'm like, yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. So I'm watching this. Jonte is what, 4th grade? Yeah, I think he's 4th grade. So I see him running around the house gathering everybody. And so before we go into what's going to be a really traumatizing event, because it was huge. It was some kind of motor club that put it together. So it was people everywhere, police everywhere. It was just a lot.
Gotcha.
But they were able to soothe themselves beforehand. And you see us standing in the circle with a 4th grader organized in an attempt to, soothe himself, to bring himself some compassion. And I think that's the greatest thing we can do, is teach each other to have compassion for ourselves, and hopefully that'll extend out in a communal sense.
Got it. So I guess one of the questions that I have, and we don't have to, go long on it, but when I was asking, is it a fight to get the family what they need? Because you work with families, specifically with children, right? Do we have, let's say that black people were open to therapy, we were open to counseling. How does the lack of insurance, it's almost like burying a relative, right? Like, there's no insurance, right? So we're on GoFundMe, or we're doing different things, right, to just handle basic functions. Right. So even if my family is open to therapy, if we are open to counseling, how do we get it? Is insurance a barrier? What are the realities of really dealing with this trauma on the streets?
Well, yeah, definitely healthcare, what level of healthcare you have, whether that healthcare provider covers that type of service, because a lot of them don't.
Okay.
And then does it cover the type of service or intervention that you need? I mean, because all counseling ain't the same. It's not all equal. Talk therapy can actually be triggering. It could be traumatic in and of itself without the proper supports, mind, body, stuff like that. And that's when healthcare typically don't cover it, when you're getting into like EMDR or nutritional supplementation and all these things to incorporate a neurobiological approach. They just want you to sit in front of somebody. And typically those somebodies don't look like you, don't understand you. And so It's really a one-sided conversation in a lot of senses. So it's very difficult in depressed communities to get access to that type of care.
Okay, so it's difficult to get access. So then wrapping around to that, are there some community organizations that deal in that gap that we should like shout out, be like, man, they're doing this because to me, that is tremendously unseen work. Oh, sure. And what I mean by that is, right, okay, so if there's an insurance gap, you need therapy, right? And then all of the other social, biological, or geographical, economic factors that go into it, right? Who's standing in the gap that we should be aware of that we don't talk about or even recognize?
Well, the good thing is there are a number of organizations and resources that are out there really trying to do the work. I mean, I was reflecting on it this morning, how big the work is. So like you said, it becomes unseen because I was listening to Thresholds, and I'm not even necessarily vouching for Thresholds. I know they do good work, but I think they were saying they have like a workforce of like 2,000 people. They serve 10,000 people, and it was like, man, how big is that number, but how big is the problem, right? But that's neither here nor there. First things first, shout out our organization, Blocks Together.
Okay.
And what we're doing, the work I'm leading, not only just being there, being compassionate and respectful of the community, which is what Blocks Together has done for decades, long before I became involved. But I think I'm really proud of the work we're doing at Cameron because we're starting to treat it like a public health issue and incorporate mind body-based intervention. So and we was talking outside about the whole Mojo Juice piece, and I know I've mentioned it on here before.
Right.
But how to use nutrition to affect the parts of the brain that are affected by trauma, particularly complex PTSD, which is cumulative chronic trauma, So we're working on that. Actually, got some tools coming now. So we're going to be using heart rate variability, which is a measure of resilience, and saliva cytokines, which are a biomarker for stress, and do assessments along the way. So are these things working that we're doing, including these nutritional supplementations, the trauma-focused yoga, all these things, do they work in a real sense? Like, I can see your body change.
Gotcha.
I can see your brain has changed relative to these things we're doing. And if that's the case, we can start to expand that out into some really, social, evolution type of stuff,
Yeah, we gotta definitely invite you back. We're gonna be taking a break this summer, but when we get into our fall lineup, because I'm assuming you'll have some time to kind of test some of these things and work on. But you just said trauma-focused yoga. Yeah, that like caught my mind. First of all, when I do yoga, it's traumatic. But that's personally for me. I start shaking immediately at the thought of downward dog or warrior pose or anything like that. So and not making fun of it, but yoga is a great way to connect internally.
Yes.
Right. And then it's the first time that I've really, and I'm sure it's floating out there, right? But trauma focused yoga really sounds like something that can help. But how do you get, first of all, past people even accepting the fact that yoga is helpful, let alone dealing in the inner city, right, on something like trauma-focused yoga? Like, how does that come about?
Well, on that note, I'm actually about to do a training, take it myself. So I'm not going to act like I'm a master at that. But okay. I would. That's a perfect opportunity to shout out, like Real Men Charities, for example. I know they've been in the news recently, but they do what's it called? Black Men Do Yoga over on 75th and Phillips.
Okay.
The Quarry Center. They've been
doing that. Who leads that?
That's Dr. Obari Chartman.
Okay. Cartman. Shout out Dr. Obari. Yeah, that's my man. He's great. He's had you and I on two consecutive panels, back-to-back months.
Definitely. So they do that work there. And if you know anything, that's Old Terrortown over there. So I think currently No Limit. But, that's an area that you wouldn't think yoga would have a place, and they're doing drum circles. So they do some real good work over there. So you have definitely a lot of grassroots organizations with the right heart and right information and approach. And I think putting those together is what's important. You can have the right heart, but not the right information or approach. You can have the right information, but not the right heart or approach. So to synthesize those is what makes it effective in our community.
What's really interesting, like everything you've said about, trauma, we've talked about filling in the gap. We've talked about, the need in the community, right? And just the because of the events and the way America has been shaped and built, it's traumatic, period, being melanated, being black, right? But it seems to me that everything you're talking about, especially since today we're going to talk about trauma in Israel, Palestine, right? You could literally drop that in the middle of what's happening right now, and they could use all of this that you're talking about. And specifically what catches my mind, and I said this on Tuesday's show, and we played the video, there's a 10-year-old Palestinian girl.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it wasn't the taking of an Israeli-Palestinian side. It wasn't I didn't diagnose, what was happening. What really affected me was it was a 10-year-old girl, and she was asking questions like, what do you expect me to do? Like, you expect me to clean it up? Like, they didn't know kids were in this building. Like, why would you bomb a place with kids? So beyond, who's at fault and it's the communities that are suffering. And so what's that trauma like at 10 years old, right? Or 6 or 7 or 16 or 17, right? Yeah. Or 47 or 37, regardless of the fact, it's this inflicting of what I call needless, like just simply flat out needless trauma, like in many of our communities here, South Side, West Side, East Side, what have you. And what are these kids to do with it other than just, throw that in your backpack, go to school, become a good citizen of the world, right? And is that how we get continuously to this cycle, right? We're told to go out and be good citizens, but how can you be good citizens when we're not dealing with the bad citizenry, right? That is literally affecting all of us, from Cape Town to Israel to what's going on or what's been happening in, Japan. You can go across the globe, and there's this constant traumatic overshadowing of events and coordinated events, not like happenstance, not like the volcano blew up, like somebody's like literally pushing a button and like, let me wreak some havoc in some other part of the world or part of the neighborhood right next to me.
No, definitely. Like I told you before, we just discussed the move bombing. I've been, so in my capacity at class, I do SEL. So I go into the classrooms and use that as an opportunity to incorporate like culturally relevant curriculum, trauma focused or whatever. So we were talking about the move bombing, and I likened it to like, hey, don't think these things just happen in a vacuum. I was alive when that happened. I was 7, I want to say. That was in 85.
Yeah.
36th anniversary, which is Thursday. But there's a video we watched on Vice did. I was there when the police bombed this block or however it's called. But there's Ramona Africa leads it. But there's a part on this little boy just breaks down crying. He wasn't a part of Move. He was just in the neighborhood. Probably lost his house. 61 homes were burned to the ground. Wow. And it was just a poignant reminder of the collateral, like you said, that collateral traumatic damage, fallout that happens from these incidents. Whether it be in Israel, Palestine, or Gaza Strip, whether it be in, like you said, South Africa, and certainly we know the science has been clear for a very long time in childhood trauma. Simple childhood trauma is life-altering, completely life-altering. In those early stages, that's when your brain is shaped. That's how relationships are formed. That's how how you view the world is dictated. And we just talking about simple aspects of neglect, parental incarceration, that kind of stuff. So you add on top of that, war crimes, just collective brutal violence, terrorism. I mean, what do we expect out of those people 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line? I think we get what we should expect. And
those people are us. Exactly. Like, you get what I'm saying? Yeah. It's not like somebody far off. Right. I was having a conversation, and this is for a whole nother show. And this was behind watching, Exterminate All the Brutes, right? Yeah, have you seen it?
Oh yeah.
Excellent. We shot excellent, that in class. Excellent. And we're gonna do a show on it next Thursday. Oh, good. So we're gonna do a little round table on it. But I was talking to one of my cousins, and I asked the question, just totally off the cuff, and this is my own trauma, and I was like, if you were living in a situation where there was terrorism, killing, like all kind of stuff around you, would you have a kid? And the immediate answer was, my cousin said back to me, I don't know. That's a great question, right? And it was like, but I don't think I would. I don't think I would want to bring a child into those warlike circumstances around me. And then I was like, so what made the slaves have children?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what is it about? And then the flip side of that, what is it about that instinct to love, to come together, to procreate? I mean, beyond the fact that they're mating you like cattle, right? Or you have to have, I'm saying, but there were some love children, right? It's a lot of children being born, supplying this endless machine of capitalism, dehumanization, demoralization, right? Just supplying it. What makes you have a child in the middle of that type of trauma? Because there's no doubt it was literally domestic terrorism at its finest.
I think humanity is resilient. Not just humanity as some kind of ideal, lofty concept about the world. I mean, like that innate concept internally of wanting to be fully human is resilient. And it shines through even the most dehumanizing experiences. I mean, other than that, how could we be here?
I guess that's what I was asking. Like, right. not for some grandiose answer, but I was like, man, if you're saying mentally, I'm talking about the conversation with my cousin, like just looking at the hood, like if I didn't have any money and it's wars up and down the block, and you got to fight to eat, and would you bring a child into the world? And it's like, maybe I wouldn't. And it's like, then what was going on in the hearts, minds of a people who knew, as far as they knew, there was no Juneteenth coming, there was no proclamation, nothing. Like, literally, we are slaves, gonna be slaves. I can walk out here at any moment, massa be upset, right? And my life is over. That was the reality of it. What makes you say, let's bring a little one into the world? And not that there's an answer to that, but, talking about trauma. And again, I started the conversation by like, it's my own trauma. Because today we're like, I got to have certain things in place and, and make sure it's a safe spot for my child.
Quite different.
Right. It's quite different. Right.
Yeah.
And so what makes them, and then, who is that? Catrice, I hope I'm saying that right. She says, at the root of it all is love. So, and I guess that's what we were talking about. At the root of it, right? There's this innate desire, ability, right, to kind of transcend no matter what the circumstance is.
That's a superhuman power right there, to be able to hold on to that in the midst of such hate. To still hold on to that, that desire to love. That's amazing. Again, it just shows how powerful our people are.
Just hate it every day. Like we talk, you know what I mean?
Built into the,
it's in the grid. Like you wake up, hate it. Like get up, get out in my field, right?
Right.
And and then on top of that, it's like, mothers and grandmothers manage to cook and show love and knit socks and scarves. Like all of the stories that we have, that's superhuman. Yeah. Like real talk. And we are still being superhuman in the middle of planned ghettos. I'm talking about urban planning where they know there are no grocery stores, where they know there's very little access to basic needs on a daily basis, right? I'm talking about the concrete jungle, and then still be able to thrive and or survive, right?
Probably more appropriate, yeah.
Yeah, survive. So I just a tribute to the hearts and the souls of the people,
Indeed.
Right? Like real talk. So listen, you all, we see you coming in the room. Appreciate you taking time out to spend your afternoon with us. With me sitting in is Brother Zarakia Amadi El. He is a counselor. He works with Blocks Together. He's a trauma specialist. But beyond that, he's just a great brother. Works with people, children on a daily in some of the most traumatic situations in Chicago. So we just want to acknowledge him for taking time out. He's sitting in for the one and only Cassiopeia Uhuru. We need you to share this conversation. We're going to go to break in a minute, and we're going to come back. We're going to be talking with Minister Amadiel Yehuda, who right now, literally right now, is seated at his laptop in Dimona, Israel, and he is a national spokesperson for the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, and we're going to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that's happening right now. They say they might be on the verge of a ceasefire, but
I thought Netanyahu said he wasn't going to do that.
Well, the Palestinians kind of backed off and said there may be, they may not push it from their end in the next 48 hours or what have you. I caught a news blurb on it, but we're going to discuss. We're going to dig into the history of it because, to be quite honest, why are they fighting? Right. What is this about? And we make up reasons like, it's oil. And who are they? Are they actually the people who the land owns the land? So we'll get to the heart of those questions. We need you to like, we need you to comment, and we need you to share the broadcast. Come back around the lunch table. When we come back from break, Minister Madiel Yehuda directly from Israel discussing the Israel-Palestinian conflict 2021. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
WIIFTBP. WIIFTBP. Media's just for you and me. WIIFTBP. Media's just for you and me.
Chicago Legal Network is the collaboration of attorneys that concentrate in many areas of the law most needed in Chicago neighborhoods. The CLN lawyers focus on personal injury, criminal defense, and other issues. The CLN lawyers all average over 20 years of legal experience and are dedicated to helping the Chicago community. The Chicago Legal Network is committed to developing black lawyers through mentorship and co-representation. So if you were injured in a car accident, slip and fall, or injured on the job, or you need assistance with criminal defense, including driving violations and DUI, check out ChicagoLegalNetwork.com for more information or call 773-912-3545. 773-912-3545.
You got to Kennedy King, so you remember Corey Brown?
I definitely remember Corey Brown from Morgan Park.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Murder, man. I got it in with y'all one day before a game. And then y'all literally went out and destroyed some people by about 50 at Kennedy King. And I'll never forget, somebody shot a jumper. It came off long. And Corey will tell this story to this day. He says he went up, and I was in the stands. He went up for the rebound. And before he could jump, he said he felt a foot on his head. And it was you. And you caught it. Classic P-Mac catching it over everybody, putting it back in. He says before he jumped, he felt a foot on his head. And Corey was 6'4", easy.
On his head.
On his head.
Yeah, Corey was 6'4", man. I used to I don't know, I had a knack, man. I was always uber athletic. Like I was taught earlier, if somebody shoot, you got to come from the opposite side. I had a guy in my neighborhood named Wayne Irvin, legendary dude to us in our neighborhood. Played at Chicago State, played at Wyoming.
Okay.
Played against Patrick Ewing. He passed away a couple years ago, but went to CVS. He was a decorated player. A lot of people knew him. And he taught me early, like, you attack offensive rebounds from the opposite side. So if somebody shoot from the left wing, you crash from the right. If somebody shoot from the top of the key, you can crash because it can go either way and you can get it. I was so big and athletic. I used to get a lot of tip dunks. Like, for some reason, people never boxed me out. And once I got a running start, if it came off anywhere over the rim and bounced up, you was dead.
This is Eugene McIntosh, one half of the illest independent sports media outlet in the whole entire land, the Bigs. Check me and my player partner Terrence Tomlin, a.k.a. T-Tom the Great, on What's in It for the Black People Media Network.
We wake up every day to these tests as we strive to be great, and they keep coming, but we gotta persevere, y'all. Yeah, thin line, mastermind, mind of the master. Which one of you after? Thin line, mind of a god, mind of a captive. Which one of you after? Thin line, mastermind, mind of the master. Which one of you after? Thin line, mind of a god, mind of a captive. Every minute I fight with lethargy, striving to be godly. With an intelligence quotient exceeding numerology. Scholar Body Honorary, School of Prophet alum. Anthropomorphized lessons so I could become the heartbeat of righteousness, the everyday fight to pump the blood of kings, breathe the breath of life, moving up like Confederates in Yankee territories in the 17th century. But it's a thin line between divinity and iniquity. Mason Dixon hitting incompletion decisions, division between symptoms of a phenom and a psychopath, gifted and asinine. I won't erase that vertical line on an incline that divides them. Climbing out this box in my mind, it's like having altitude sickness on alpine expedition. Genius vision never fixed in on the depth below. Focus on elevation where others never dare to go. And brainiacs ain't contained in that receptacle. Incredible creative energy becomes perceptible. The cerebral can be an evil alter ego, a true pal, and you shall become legendary and futile. Development of a god. I sleep between dates on the calendar. Can't escape a date with a challenger. Now that's a blind date in the field division, but my other senses reveal I'm winning. Yeah. The thin line.
Welcome back to the green side of things. It's your man Sadeek, and I am sitting in with Zarakia Amadiel. He is a community trauma counselor and all-around great brother, and he is sitting in for the one and only Cassiopeia Uhuru on the green side. Yeah, shout out to her. She's taking care of some big black mall business. They are launching some tremendous stuff, and so Cassie is out there making it happen in the streets and also preparing for Juneteenth, which is coming up. So we'll be making announcements about that, and just shout out to her and the Black Mall crew out there today. So Zarakian, thank you for taking time to sit with us.
My pleasure.
Appreciate that. And we have in live from Israel a national spokesperson for the African Hebrew Israelites from Jerusalem. We have none other than the minister, Amadiel Yehuda. Minister, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can hear you, Brother Sadeek.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And we want to thank you for taking your time out. It's about 9:30 p.m. or so there in Israel. So we want to appreciate you for working all day and staying up with us this evening to facilitate or have this conversation. So I just want to acknowledge that and share our appreciation and love, especially since you were on with us a couple of weeks ago. This is your second go-round on the green side of things, so we really appreciate that.
Glad to be here with you, and I'm glad to see your special guest host there, you know.
Shalom,
Rocky, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Hallelujah.
Yeah, I thought, when you're reaching out for a guest host, right, and talking about it, Cassie really had some very important things to take care of, and I was like, man, let's see what Zaraki is doing, especially since you were going to be on the show. So, it's great to have both of you all at this point, I think. So we shall see. We shall see. Right. So, Minister, let's jump right in. I want to jump into the present, and then I want to go into kind of a historical piece. So, for those of us, all we get is news sound bites about what's going on there in Israel. So, since you have lived there since 1978, and the community repatriated in 1969, give us a on the ground what's happening right now between the Israeli government and the Palestinian government or factions there in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, as always, I'd like to give all honor and praises to the Holy One of Israel, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And I greet you in the Hebraic tongue, Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom.
Currently, first of all, this whole episode is indeed tragic. It is on one level unnecessary, but on another level, prophetically and historically, we find that there are historic roots to what is unfolding today, and therefore certain things are held to be unavoidable. When you look at the idea of history preceding destiny or determining one's destiny. But what actually, you did mention the possibility of a ceasefire. I understand that it's been bantered around, it's been floated around. neither side wants to be seen as capitulating. Whoever gives in would be perceived as having had the not having the upper hand, and so that's problematic for them. It's not about the lives that are it's about positions and interests and perceptions that would take a bigger seat in the decision making at this particular point. So we're just hoping that logic and reason would prevail. And in a world as we live in today, we know that's asking for a lot. That's just being real in the chaotic times that we live in, and the absolute darkness, spiritual darkness that we see prevalent amongst the world's leaders. So we are monitoring things. We here in Des Moines have over the course of the last couple of weeks, we've had to run for the bomb shelters only twice. And I say that only twice because
Wow.
we're talking about 3,500 odd missiles that have been fired into Israel over the last 2 weeks. And so if only 2 that came in this direction that caused the sirens to go off, and we had to beat that hasty retreat to those bomb shelters, that's a pretty good, this might be one of the safest places in Israel at this particular time. And we've always said that, our people over there in the state side would always ask, well, they would worry about us at times like this. And we would say, we're actually kind of worried about people on that side. And it's either that we're crazy, Sadeek, or that it's something we know, And so we maintain that even in times of trauma. I heard you talk about yoga being traumatic for you. I might need to attend some of my wives' classes, to get some of this stress off. But definitely, it's a time to be concerned. But we're in the spiritual center. We're in our spiritual ancestral home here, and so we knew that with all the trauma that my son was countering, was relaying about the different situations that I know he deals with all of that trauma. We know that we escaped that, and certainly if we would go through the process of freeing ourselves from that, and we're secure and on a path that's leading in an upward trajectory away from that type of trauma, certainly we wouldn't come 4,000 or 5,000 miles to meet with at the hands of a wayward missile from Gaza. Those missiles don't have our names on it. Yah forbid. COVID-19 doesn't have our name on it. And you have to really understand what I'm saying about, we're in a very critical time on the planet that there's a visitation going on. And if we don't get right on the right side, which of course would be in environmental language on the green side and so forth, if we don't get on the right side of these issues, then we are in trouble. We're exposed. We are vulnerable to the various things that are visiting us at this particular time. So we're secure. We're comfortable. We're concerned. We're not overly worried or traumatized by anything at this particular point. Our eyes are on, and our hopes lie with our spirituality, that relationship that we have with the Creator, with the creation, and with people. And so we're secure in that and comfortable at this particular point.
Wow, I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Minister. So there are a couple of things that you said that I want to highlight and then kind of dive into a little different perspective. So we had a guest on our show Tuesday, and he's an artist, and his name is Kahari. And Kahari, we brought up the video of the 10-year-old Palestinian. And I brought it up because it was just a 10-year-old girl talking about the destruction of her neighborhood. I really didn't deal with whether she was Israeli or Palestinian, we were talking about trauma. And there are a couple of things that Kahari said that struck me, right? One, he said, man, I don't really have time to be, worried about Israel because it's a pink people's fight. And then when he said pink people, he was speaking of non-melanated people, right? And I'm using code here, just so because we don't want because Mark Zuckerberg is watching, and we just want him to know that we appreciate pink people too. So that being said, he said it's a pink people's fight, and I'm here in Chicago trying to fight trauma in Bronzeville, right? So it's kind of really hard to identify with what's going on. And then after that, he came back in the conversation later and said, not verbatim, but almost he said that there is a work being done on the earth and we need to get on the right side of it. He literally said that the earth is cleansing itself and our internal work is to get on the right side of the cleansing. And you just literally talked about, get on the right side, get on the green side. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. However, the comment was to the need for us to recognize what's going on in a more holistic manner.
Yes.
So, I really appreciate you bringing that up. But his first comment was, and we hear this often, right? First of all, many people don't know, and I didn't know till a certain amount of studying, that there were actually black people in Israel, because you don't see it on the news, right? Israel and the Middle East, for some reason, is not connected to African issues or even the continent, right? And so there's very little attachment other than pink people are fighting and there are bombs going off across the world.
What they got to do with me?
What does that have to do with me? So what I'd like to do is kind of share a unique perspective of the history of that part of the world and how that relates to what's happening today. So we know that racism is real across the planet. It's not just a unique positioning of the United States or of the British capital or of the South African apartheid, right? It's not this geographical limited structure. It exists boundlessly across the planet where there is European control and hegemony. So if you could, for us, kind of take us back a little bit, how do we even get to a pink people's fight in a part of the world that would appear to be, for all reasons, historically and in antiquity, melanated?
Well, your last comment about historically this region being historically melanated, I think is on the upper echelons of those who even approach understanding this part of the world. And I say that because you and I are from the generation that grew up. I know I see that gray hair, you and I, we're from the generation that grew up with pictures of Europeans on our walls, in the churches, in our homes, in our Bibles, on the television screen, every Christmas and every Easter. We grew up with those images that depicted the peoples of this part of the world in antiquity. And so, come what may, however elevated in our consciousness, and I will use an example. A brother I know in Durban, he's a professor, and he teaches, in fact, he's written a couple of books about the Amazulu, the Zulu people, and he writes from the connection that they have the historical roots in ancient Kemet. And of course, he, finding out about us, he wanted to explore this idea, because it's not just ancient Kemet that the Zulu and other Bantu peoples connect to, but ancient Israel. And so it depends on your perspective. And so just recently, in the last year, this last month or so, he sent out Easter greetings. And on his greeting was a picture of a cross with a lot of European images in the cross. And so here you have an example of someone whose history is certainly elevated in his understanding, but his spirituality is still captured. It's still captured by that Eurocentric idea. And he's yet to be able to make that bridge and bridge that gap that is so essential to bring somebody's soul and mind and spirit into harmony. And so when you talk about Israel being in the Middle East, that is a terminology that identifies someone's consciousness about geology and geography being captured. Right. Middle East is simply a geopolitical term. There is no Upper East. There is no Middle East, or excuse me, Middle West. Where did the terminology come from? It simply came from those who actually had the power to define in that era. And the terminology came from the British. And it only makes sense when you realize that when they were ruling the seven seas, when the British Empire ruled the seven seas and the sun never set on the British Empire, that when they traveled from the center of their world to their east, and got as far as they could, Japan, China, etc., they called that the Far East. Makes sense geopolitically. And passing through this particular region, the Arabian Peninsula, this part of the world, they called this the Middle East. That made sense in that context. But that's a geopolitical term. It is not a geographical term. Geopolitics changes, geopolitics shifts. And unless you still believe that the queen is actually ruling over the planet, then you have to have a new definition of this region. And geologically, logic is built into that term. Geologically, Israel is sitting on the African tectonic plate. So there's no separation, and even the most conscious of the Afrocentric community, they will still use the logos and they will still wear the jewelry in which they use the Suez Canal as a boundary. Well, our departed brother Ali Mazrui, great professor, he blew that out the water a couple decades ago about the Suez Canal being a man-made ditch, and that it cannot be used as a boundary, that the whole Arabian Peninsula is part of that tectonic plate. Even the Sinai Peninsula is back in the hands of Egypt. So how do you stop at the Suez Canal? That reflects a great unconsciousness about this region. And so, yes, in antiquity, no question about it, the peoples in this land, the peoples in this land were African.
Okay.
That's Newsweek, 1988 Newsweek, a Black Adam and Eve. I do believe they try to say those are the first people. Everybody thinks they were a couple. We always are fighting with the Egyptologists of the world, who finally conceded in the last couple of decades that Egypt was in Africa, but they have never conceded that, they were black. Yes, Egypt was in Africa, but they weren't black like that. That's their position. So when this issue of National Geographic came out called The Black Pharaohs, it caught my attention. And I said, wait a minute, they're actually going to tell the truth now about the ancient Kemetan people? And when you get into the story, you realize, oh no, this was just a trick for Black History Month in 2008. This was a Black History Month to get you to buy the cover, and based on the cover. And you realize that what they're talking about inside is that they were 70 years, 70 years out of how many thousands of years of ancient Kemetan Egyptian reign, that they are giving credit to dark-skinned melanated people for having ruled.
Wow.
That they're the Nubians that came in after Egypt collapsed and ruled for 70 years. This is what the experts and the anthropologists of the world, teach. Here is my teacher, the great Prince Shliach Ben Yehuda, came out of Chicago, came out of a print shop on, I believe it was Cottage Grove. And this is him in the late 70s, standing next to an Afro-Palestinian. Nasik Shaliak, Prince Shaliak, would take us all over this land, and we would go to communities where the people look like this, look like us. And this is something that you don't find on National Geographic. You won't find it on the Travel Channel. You won't find it on the Learning Channel. You won't find it on BBC or CNN. And this is the reality of this land. And so the land is populated, not very sparsely, I'll admit, but it's like a great conspiracy took place in antiquity to sweep this land clean by the hands of the Romans, by the hands of the Crusaders in later generations, later centuries. And it's like a crime being committed, and someone is trying to cover things up. And so they sweep up the crime scene. But a good investigator can come in, a good CSI agent can come in and go to the corners and get his spectrometers and his certain lighting and his Q-tips and tweezers, and he can find hairs and he can find DNA evidence, and he can reconstruct the scene. And when you do that, when you take the time, when anthropologists and historians take that time and are honest with what they will find, this was undoubtedly an African land and remains an African land. Hebrew and Arabic are classified officially as Afro-Semitic, Afro-Asiatic languages. So we could go on and on with that. And we're on the ground. Right. We're thankful for Prince Shaliak and others who paved the way to open the doors and open our eyes to this reality. So that I'll call the names, because someone, Zarakia, one of your siblings, Yahav, was calling my attention today to Runoko Rashidi.
Yes.
Great scholar, but who doesn't recognize the Bible as a historical text, who cannot see that connection and the importance of this land as being part of Africa. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean it's not so. So yeah, there's so much, and it's a whole new paradigm that would respond to brothers like that. This was not originally a pink land, and I don't find any pink anthropologists who would dispute that. Right. No Israelis would dispute these facts.
Not today.
Right. They won't dispute the facts, but they'll still display the pink images. So first of all, thank you for that very comprehensive answer. I want to point to some personal experience. So I am just old enough to remember, and I actually still have the textbook. Ron, you listening to this? Because, I know when I start talking about how old I am, it's hard to believe that I'm 32. But I still
fact check in here, Ron. Fact check.
No, a good anthropologist, right? Nothing laying around. All my ID says 32. And thank you for supporting that minister. So, but I still have my grammar school textbook, which has, even though this is very, very nuanced, right? It's implied. And this is the message I got as a kid. I still have the textbook where we had a whole chapter on Egypt with all of the pink images on Egypt. And then there was another chapter on Africa.
You had a chapter on Africa?
I had a chapter on Africa, but here was the issue. Right, but here was the issue. Egypt wasn't a part of Africa. Oh. So I'm actually testifying to the fact that they didn't say that, but you don't need to say it if there's a chapter on Egypt with pink images, and now as a black child I flip to the chapter on Africa, and people are in the bush. There's a whole different set of images and a whole different set of historical facts. You don't have to disconnect the two. You've already done it with the two different chapters and the different set of images. So, and that now having to look in history, read, re-educate myself, how long then before we realize, because simply put, what you're telling me is what we consider the Middle East is actually Africa. And if they took Egypt out of Africa, right, and then even if you get into history, whether it's from the Dead Sea Scrolls, you could go down, you could get into biblical history. Even if you get into that, if Egypt and Canaan or Israel are landlocked and Jesus went to go hide in Egypt, or Joseph's son went to go, coat of many colors, right?
Yeah.
He's actually sold into slavery by his brothers,
Joseph,
right?
yeah.
Joseph in Egypt, right? It's this whole geographical, like you could literally just walk there.
Right.
How long before we reconnect the idea that what they call the Middle East is actually Africa?
It makes me think, if I may, about the continual historical intentional devaluation of African accomplishments, right?
Exactly.
Because you can't deny Egypt, that history is there. I mean, obviously they have monuments to its regality, but if I can take that away from you, Israel, that story has value historically. I can take that away from you and just take it completely out your historical record. Again, it continues that dehumanization of the people who actually did those great works.
I love it. So we got to go to break, Minister Zarakia. After this break, I want to tackle
Minister
how
Amadiel, I haven't got the minister yet there. I'm going to take my Abba's shine.
Yes, okay. I want to tackle how the land becomes pink. And I think you have some great information for us on that. So you're on the green side of things. You're with Sadeek today. We've got Zarakia and Minister Amadiel Yehuda in from Israel live, chopping it up about this Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the history of what we now know is not the Middle East. It's actually northeastern Africa. Right. We'll see you after this break.
WIIFTBP. WIIFTBP. Media's just for you and me. WIIFTBP. Media's just for you and me.
Introducing your trusted source for high-quality Black emojis, better known as Blackmoji. We believe Black is beautiful, and that beauty should be reflected in the digital market. Now there is an app that does just that, starting with Black Greek letter organizations. Blackmoji D9 offers more than an emoji app. It is a cultural experience of Black excellence. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store to access a specially curated catalog of emojis representing the Divine Nine. Use the emojis to celebrate Black Greek events, acknowledge current events, support social causes, and learn about esteemed Black Greek members who blaze the trail of Black history. A portion of every subscription goes toward a scholarship fund specifically for members of Black Greek letter organizations to help keep the legacy alive. Download the Blackmoji app today.
Since 2018, nearly 3,000 tax credit scholarships have been awarded to Black students in Illinois to attend private schools that best fit their needs. Now, Governor Pritzker wants to slash this program. In a time of much uncertainty, we need greater equity in education for our families and children, not less. Call your state representative and senator and urge them to stand up for our kids and their future by supporting the tax credit scholarship program. For more information, visit empoweredillinois.org.
Yeah, man. Ideas. It's ideas, man. You don't have to find me. I'm walking right behind me. It's so clear to see that you wanna be free. You don't have to find me. I'm walking right behind you. It's so clear to see that you wanna be free. Let's go. Standing my ground, I can't mess around now. It's like my time is in a bottle, captured by your love. Yeah. Now I know women's got this thing going on. We can't stay around so long, but I wanna come correct. Baby, get your foot off my neck. You don't have to find me. I'm walking right behind thee. Understand clearly.
Welcome back to the green side of things on this beautiful Thursday afternoon in Chicago. It's going to get up to 80 degrees, Ron, so you're going to be able to let your locks flow today. You understand? You're going to be able to get out there on the lake. I want to recognize our producer. He is the man, LeBron Rilla, in the house. Say what's up to the people, Ron.
What's going on, Sadeek?
Hey, it's all good. Does this any of this information sound a little interesting?
Of course. It's always interesting on the green side of things.
Hey, I love it. Did you know the Middle East was Africa?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
I had no debates about that.
Well, we're not trying to debate it. I'm just saying though, it makes for an interesting pin in a lot of conversations that we tend not to have. But I appreciate you being involved in the conversation. Ron is the best producer in the world. Shout out to Mary, who's back in the producer's booth. So we love you, Mary. Thank you very much. Come on over here, share some love. You gonna say hi? Say hi to the people.
Hey, everybody, what's good? Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday.
Thank you.
We want to acknowledge the everybody around here who does a great job at WIIFTBP Media. What's in it for the black people? If not for the Marys, the Rons, and specifically Maze Jackson, who's out there as well, we wouldn't have this platform that we come in on a daily basis to inspire, to talk about what's sustainable, what's natural, and what's cultural. So we're sitting here with a guest co-host today, Zarakia Amadi El. He is sitting in for the one and only Cassiopeia Uhuru, who is out handling some really big black mall business, and she'll be back on Tuesday to share that with us and to chop it up with us. And we have live from Israel none other than the minister, Amadiel Ben Yehuda, who is a national spokesperson for the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem, who have been in Israel as a people since 1969. And Minister Yehuda himself has been there. I'm sorry, you must have went there as 2 because you look great. He got there in 1978, so you must have been about 2 years old when you got there. Must be a youth thing with the whole plant eating and living in the desert. So, but anyway, we have the minister on with us who is discussing the historical roots of the land of Israel. But we're backtracking to just go into how we find ourselves in these quagmires, conundrums, and situations today that continue to produce trauma. But there's some history to this land that the trauma goes back thousands of years, starting with the fact that this was Africa, right? And so we just established that. So let's talk a little bit about the land and how it wasn't pink and how it becomes pink.
Well, as my Abba, and for get the bias out the way, as my spiritual father, that's why my name is Zarakia and Zarakia Ben Sar Madiel. So yeah, I'm biased. I'm gonna throw that out there right quick. But when I was over there, I attended University of Ben Gurion in the Negev Desert. I remember, I think it was either you, Abba, or Prince Shaliak, who took me to a community called Prison Gate in Jerusalem. And mind you, I thought I was pretty, knowledgeable about African history, this, that, and the other, and I knew about the 4 quarters of Jerusalem. But the next thing I know, I'm being introduced to like black, Arab people going into their homes.
They look like Ron.
Yeah.
Like real talk.
No, even darker. It was just images, like I said, you did not see. I did not know existed.
Still don't see them.
Still don't see them in a neighborhood that I didn't even know existed in history. And they call it Prison Gate, and I'll let my Abba tell more to that story, but because it was actually a prison in the Ottoman Empire in which the indigenous people were captured and kept. And then, just another testament to our resilience, they turned that prison into an actual living, vibrant community. But it was my first personal introduction to not just the historical nature of the indigenous people of that land, but like that there are still actually people there. So, Abba, if you could tell us more about, you know, as Ali Mazrui, since you mentioned him earlier, I think it's something you taught me, that he made the quote, "What is Africa?" is what Europeans finally decided that it was. And so how did Europe change what we know now to be, and what Ron has always known apparently, to be Northeastern Africa into this Middle Eastern thing that's so foreign from our understanding?
Again, Brother Ron is part of that upper echelon of the enlightened ones, you know, hanging out with brothers like Sadeek and company. No, without question. And I want to say something. I want to say I'm actually sitting today in the capacity more of another hat that I wear. And that's as I'm a member of the board of directors of an organization called the International Society for the Study of African Judaism, ISAJ for short, ISSAJ. And this is an anthropological society. And because of the focus on African Jews, African Judeans, African Hebrew Israelites, and of course, Hebrew Israelites is probably the fastest, most dynamic group of spiritual people and positions and so forth that's going on in America at this particular time, this great awakening of this identity. And so if it weren't for us here, if it weren't for the African Lemba, if it weren't for the Lemba people and the legitimate genetic connections that were demonstrated that they have to this land, and the Igbo and so forth, if it weren't for us being part of the organization, then the organization would lose its credibility, frankly. And so we simply are there to challenge the historical paradigm that we're saying was wrong. That when they approach this land, they study it from the perspective that it was in antiquity, as you said, pink skin. And that is not a historical fact. That we're not trying to undermine anyone's claim to this land. And I want to be very clear about that. But what we're saying is that you have to deal with prophetic and historical truth. And so the land historically was populated by a much darker pigmented people than it is currently. And so how did that transformation take place? And then what is the prognosis for the future? And I'll certainly want to come back on that point, because all this is going somewhere, and all this has very much a lot to do with the current issues, with the current that we find called the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. But you cannot isolate, you cannot take the history and toss it out. I was watching a clip earlier, not back an hour ago, Alan Dershowitz, who was trying to say, get over, Israel's been in existence 50 years. At that time, I think 60 years when he was making this particular speech. He's saying, get over it, get over it. Well, certain things we know as a spiritual people, we know that when you have a foundation that is not properly laid, then you can't keep adding on to it and building onto it without having some problems. You're going to have to deal with some real serious structural issues. And so our foundation is that of truth. We have to deal with the truth of the matter. And again, the truth is that in antiquity, this was Africa. That when you mention about Joseph, the real issue as to why they cannot give up ancient Egypt is because they would have to give up ancient Israel also. And so this is the tooth and nail fight in anthropology, in archaeology, in ancient history, where they don't want to concede Egypt, because with Egypt goes Israel. And so that is at the crux of the issue. So we have to go back and look at where things were transformed. And again, it's not about undermining anyone else's claim and narrative to this land, but it's about defending ours, defending the African narrative to this land. Because when you look at these conflicts, you have your your Israeli side, you have your Palestinian side, but there's a third dynamic here that actually has stakeholders on both sides of that. And that is the African one. You have African Judeans, African Israelites, African Hebrews, and on the other side, you have Afro-Palestinians who are part and parcel of this conflict. But you don't hear about this. You don't see this. This is not a centrally discussed topic.
Minister Yehuda, could you just do me a favor? And I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I think the terminology you just used in terms of Afro-Palestinian, like you ran through 3 or 4 terms that aren't used in mainstream media. And we have a very, our audience is literally paying attention to what you're talking about. I'm seeing comments about the Middle East. So we're listening. Could you just slow down and run through some of those terms that define Africans who are still in that land and who have been a part of that land for centuries?
Okay. And this, you would think that we as African people, we tend to support the underdogs in struggles. We relate to that concept because we have been our underdogs. And so we tend to relate to the Palestinian side of the dynamic. And so I'm not going, again, humanity, the 10-year-old, the babies, the Israeli children that are affected, all the trauma on both sides of this conflict, horrendous, not defending either side. But we have to deal with the history. And so I've got a book here called The Arabs. The book was written in 1937, published in 1937, called The Arabs. And in there, there's a quote that says, the original inhabitants of Arabia were not the familiar Arabs of our own time, but a very much darker people. Now, in a book called The Arabs, where do you think that the author would talk about the original Arabians? Certainly the first chapter, if not the first few pages. But no, that quote that says the original inhabitants of Arabia were a much darker people in antiquity, that's on page 339 of a 350-page book. It's literally in the appendix. It's the appendix. So that tells me that this author didn't want to deal or confront that issue up front. Here is a photograph of Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl is considered to be the father of Zionism. This is on the boat that brought him to Eretz Yisrael, to the land of Israel. The first time that Herzl came to the land of Israel. Look who's on the boat with him in this corner. You see certainly an African image, an African personage there. Okay? He's wearing the he's wearing the cultural garb of what would be called an Arab. He's wearing the long flowing robes, etc. Now, if you go to the Museum of Jewish History here in Tel Aviv, they have the same photograph as part of their exhibition. Except in their multi-million-dollar exhibition, this side of the photograph is cropped off. And again, it points to someone trying to hide, to relegate to a lower importance this African presence that goes back generations. So again, we're not trying to undermine anyone else's claim to this land, but we're saying that there is a narrative, there is a presence, there is a history that is not widely known and that needs to be front and center. You mentioned about going to Prison Gate Street, Zarakia.
Yes, sir.
Prison Gate Street is part of the Muslim quarter. It is a small neighborhood within the Muslim quarter. Now, when I went to a photographer shop in the old city of Jerusalem, I came across a photograph of the famous area called the Western Wall Plaza, or the Kotel in Hebrew. It's the Wailing Wall Plaza. And the caption reads, the Moors or the Moorish Quarter. And it is taken from the height of Mount Zion, looking down on where the Western Wall is, where the plaza is today. This is what it looked like in 1922. Here you see the wall, and all of this area here currently is vacant. It's a wide open space where they have lots of first of all, prayers that take place there, different events, the induction of IDF soldiers, etc., all take place in this area here that in 1922 was filled with homes, businesses, mosques that were part of, again, the Moors Quarter. Who were the Moors? Again, I'm talking to knowledgeable brothers there. These were the Moors. The Moors were African people. A lot of us have this poster in our homes, and you know we're familiar with this image painted in 1884.
Absolutely.
So this is all part of this history that has been literally covered up, literally bulldozed. That particular area was intact in 1967. In the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel got the upper hand on Jordan, they literally bulldozed that area and created that wide open space that you see now. But that was part of what would today, what you bear witness of, Zarakia, the African Quarter. The Moors Quarter, who lived there? Just like the Muslim Quarter, the Jewish Quarter, the Armenian Quarter, it identifies the residents of that particular area. And so this is all part of a history. Here's another historical tidbit for us. We know that many of the Israelites and other surrounding peoples of Northeast Africa were driven south during the Crusades and driven out of this land, and they were forced out of this land. The Romans in 70, constant military, European military pressure from the north drove many of the original peoples into the deeper parts of the continent. And so in West Africa, you have a predominance of those whose migration patterns and whose oral narratives say that they came from Northeast Africa. Well, among them, you have the Ashanti, the Ewe, the Yoruba Igbo, but amongst the West African people, they developed a language called Adinkra. And of course, these are symbols, but all languages use symbols. Alphabet there are symbols. And so this is a symbol. It's called, I don't know if I can pronounce it properly, it's called the Kramu Bono Ama Yehu Kramu Pa. And what it means, what it's loosely translated as, it says the Muslim makes it difficult for a good one to be recognized. But I spoke to one of the curators in Accra at the museum where I first saw this symbol, and he said that it's speaking about the Muslim from the north. The Muslim from the north is the quote unquote bad Muslim. In other words, he makes it hard on the true Muslim, on the real Muslim, because of his behavior. And so this ties directly into the history of what J.C. DeGraff Johnson, in his book, African Glory, talked about the two different Arab invasions of Africa, of West Africa. Two separate invasions. The first was during the time of Muhammad. They were cultured. They were statesmen. They were diplomats. But yes, if they couldn't convince you to straighten up and act right, yes, it was, maybe the sword will influence you in the right direction. And 700 years later, J.C. DeGraff Johnson speaks of a second Arab invasion of Africa. And he describes that character as being uncouth, rapacious, destructive, incapable of recognizing culture wherever it existed. And so what happened between the year 700 and during Muhammad's time and roughly 1400, when that second wave of Islamic invaders came? What happened was the Crusades.
That's right.
And the Crusades were Europeans who came from the north and who eventually got the upper hand over Salah al-Din and other great African Moorish generals and warriors, and drove them out, drove them deeper into the south. So when you look at, yes,
I don't.
So here's where you get your Afro-Palestinians.
Here we go. Okay, go ahead.
No,
go ahead, Minister.
So
go ahead.
It is the remnant. All right. It is the remnant. It is the remnant of those who came into this land as warriors from Europe, as a warring people who got the upper hand over the Moorish peoples that drove those inhabitants out. But if any of your listeners and viewers did time in the military, they're used to MREs. If they go to Iraq or Afghanistan, they got MREs, meals ready to eat. And so you didn't have that in antiquity, which meant that your food wasn't being flown in from American kitchens, and you didn't have bases, big, huge bases to provide your sustenance. So it meant that the soldiers had to depend on the land, and they didn't have time to farm. They didn't have time to study and get a knowledge of the land, which meant that the people, the average people who lived on the land, the peasants were the ones who grew the food. And this goes back to antiquity. This goes back to the days of Yeshua, when the Romans were taxing the people and demanding the fish and certain amounts of wheat, bushels of wheat, to sustain those foreign troops. And so who do you think those brothers and sisters that were tending the farms were? I gave you a little hint. I said they were brothers and sisters. They were Africans. In the Arabic terminology, they were called fellahin. Fellahin. It's where you get the term fella. He's just a regular fella. He's a good fella.
Wow.
He's a peasant. He's an average regular person. And so these brothers and sisters didn't care about if it was the Mohammedans who were ruling or if it was the Christians who were ruling. If it was the Christians, okay, fine, we go with that. If it's the Muslims, Allahu Akbar. They just wanted to tend their lands and remain here in this land. And so that became the remnant. That was the remnant of the original inhabitants of this land that existed here up until this day.
So Minister, that is definitely a very in-depth picture, if you will, of this transition from a melanated African space or geographical boundary, if you will, to this incursion from Europeans, right? Specifically, I think one of the things that to the audience, before we go to break, and you've actually written on this subject, right? There were actually decrees that went out from the Christian church, specifically from Pope Urban II, who actually declares the fact that the purpose of this crusade is to literally remove the quote unquote wicked race, right? Yeah. So not just an uncoordinated effort by some Europeans who happened on this northeastern African land. Like, it's literally a government slash religious slash authoritative dictate to literally go in and remove African people.
Ethnic cleansing. In ancient times, yes, absolutely. He inaugurated the Crusades in the year 1096 with that statement: "Go and wrest, force by force, wrestle, take, snatch that land from the wicked race." Some interpretations say infidel, because he was a French pope. So some interpretations say from the infidel, but if you look up infidel, it's referring to a particular, in that era, that they would have called them wicked and sinful. And so if you want to know how this connects up with the African, go to the definition of black right now in a Grolier Webster's encyclopedic dictionary. Go to the definition black and see if you don't see wicked as one of the definitions.
Wow. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're going to go on a break here, and we want to do exactly what you talked about, right? You talked about this history being prophetic and even a prognosis for the future, and we want to tie it back into what's happening today. So we're going to go on a break. We appreciate all of you out there, both on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. We see you out there in the audience, even tagging people for this last half hour. Bring a few more people in the room for this conversation. We appreciate you being with us. Shout out to everybody out there in the audience. People are literally taking notes, making comments, and we're talking about the African, Aboriginal, or indigenous presence in northeastern Africa, or what today is called the Middle East, boiling down to the fact that the transplants or the people in the land today are not necessarily the original people who inhabited that land thousands of years ago. And so we just want to provide some historical context and bring it up to date so that we can see what's happening, how it's happening, and how we relate to what's going on in Israel. So that being said, thank you. We need you to like, comment, and share. You're on the green side of things. Today I've got Zaraki sitting in with me, and we've got Minister Madiel Ben Yehuda from the land of Israel himself live. We'll see you after the break.
WIIFTBP.
WIIFTBP. Media's just for you and me. WIIFTBP. Media's just for you and me.
I tell them to blow, I keep that metal close. That's how we ride in Chicago.
Alderman Lopez, welcome back to the Maze Jackson Show. The mayor has a very peculiar way she's dealing with this, and I'm trying to understand, why does it seem like we're handling this with kid gloves?
The reason that she's not going after the root cause, which is gangs, the reason she's not calling out the silent enablers, as I tweeted out the other day, is because those are many of the same people that she relied on to get elected. I'm talking about the not-for-profits, those that reach out for grants and try to be the intermediaries in a community to try and bridge some of these anti-violence groups, things of that nature. These organizations that say they're trying to build bridges oftentimes are the ones that are enabling the gang lifestyle and allowing it to go unchecked and not holding accountable the individuals causing the violence in the neighborhoods. Those same partners, which she funds, which she relies on, were unceremoniously all pimping themselves out at press conference.
Ooh.
Saying that nobody said a word about gangs, but what they did say is that we need more money for the programs that we offer to help stop the violence. And clearly for more money to go to organizations that are working against the residents of the city of Chicago.
Alderman, how did y'all approve $37 million to go to one ward for violence prevention? $37 million? I don't think there's been a $37 million investment in anything black.
When these amendments to the budget or when these programs come before us, and I've asked the last time that these were proposed by the administration, what metrics are we using to ensure that everyone with their hand out was not still enabling gangbangers in the middle of the night? And oftentimes have intervened on behalf of gangbangers, particularly in the Latino community. When you see in other communities, like the black community, when you start doling out contracts to, say, Metropolitan Family Services, and now they're responsible for doling out to organizations to come into neighborhoods like, for example, West Englewood, contract out to organizations that have no connection to a community, build no bridges to a neighborhood, but get $300,000 to stop violence.
The most dangerous show in the morning.
Check, 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 check.
Oh, please, don't
be right. Oh, please, don't you rock my boat. Oh, no, 'cause I don't want my boat to be right. I'm telling you just, I like it like this. Keep this just like this. And you should know by now.
Welcome back to the green side of things. It's your man Sadeek, and I'm sitting in today with Zarakia Amadiel in the seat of Cassiopeia Uhuru, who is out handling some big business for the Black Mall. Shout out to the Black Mall and Cassiopeia and all that she does for the community. She'll be back with us on Tuesday, letting us know the big things that she's out there working on. And we literally have live in with us from Israel, from the Holy Land, Minister Amadiel Ben Yehuda. He is sitting with us and having a very extensive conversation about the present makeup of the land, the historical underpinnings of how it got to its present makeup, and literally the organized movement of African people out of that land to the influx of Europeans to develop it into kind of the lackluster melanated area that it is today. So
That was politically correct.
and I'm trying to be, because again, I know Brother Zuckerberg is watching us, and we want to make sure that we are being politically correct on these issues. So, Minister Amadiel, thank you again for taking your time out. We've got 24 minutes or 20 minutes left in the broadcast, and before you go into the present state and the prognosis for the future based on these historical underpinnings, I just want to shout out the fact that there are several people who are also watching us live on YouTube, right? And so we've got people live on Facebook, live on YouTube. We've got Deborah Stewart. We've got Maganiel Israel. We've got Mama Zizi is out there. We've got Brother Daniel out there. We've got Brother Hanuk that is out there. In here, we've got Sandy Young. We've got Sister Mary Elizabeth. We've got Sister Newburn is out there. And
Shout out to my brother Toussaint.
We got Toussaint in the audience. And so we can't call everybody's name. There's so many of you all out there. We appreciate you spending your afternoon with us on the green side of things. And shout out to Mary Elizabeth. She pinned something.
Yeah. She had a great comment. She said in response to your comment about Pope Urban, I believe it was missionaries went before the mercenaries.
Yeah, missionaries followed by mercenaries.
Followed by mercenaries, yeah. So that was a profound statement and really apt to what happened.
To what happened, and so we're definitely paying attention, Minister Amadiel, and we are so thankful for just sharing this historical and timely information with us. Let's jump right into how that affects what's happening today. And the prognosis for the future, and I think, and I'll say this in my own mental wonderings about these events, like, will this ever? Because it's like, you hit me, let me hit you back. You threw a rock, let me throw a stone back. How does this shape up in the future moving forward?
It's interesting, Sadeek, that you just said that. Is there any hope? Can this be resolved? And I had here, this is a book called Arab and Jew, Wounded Spirits and Promised Land. And the message that I'm putting forth, again, is not to denigrate either the Israeli or the Palestinian narrative about how they connect to the land. It is to defend and put forth the African narrative and the African claim to this land. So there are three narratives concerning this land now. And so in this book, Arab and Jew, written in the mid-'80s, he says, he's speaking to someone is speaking to him. He says, you Americans think that problem has a solution. Well, this problem, this is as a psychologist, he says, you Americans think that every problem has a solution. Well, this problem, talking about the Arab-Jewish problem, Arab-Israeli problem, doesn't have a solution. Maybe you can control it, keep it from blowing up, but solve it, never. So
wow,
that is, and our position would be that operating under the old world paradigm, that statement is absolutely correct. That it doesn't have a solution if your paradigm is functioning based on the way that the world has been constructed over the last 500 years or so. Here's a history magazine, BBC History Magazine, the cover. This is from, what's the date on this? This could be, well, it's century. So you're talking about 1919, the end of World War I. So this is 2019. The magazine asked, World War I, was it worth it? Seriously? Do you know how many millions of lives were lost in World War I? Do you realize that World War II was just a continuation and unfinished business from World War I? And of course, the long-awaited World War III that some think is on the horizon, but some of us say is already well underway because we know how wars begin. Mm-hmm. What is it about them that they actually asked the question, were millions and millions of maimed soldiers and lives lost by Europeans was worth it? What could they possibly be thinking? How do they think about the value of a human life, a human being? And so obviously that paradigm, that dynamic has to change, Brother Sadeek. When you go back and when you look at the roots of World War I, what do the history books say? What do all the talk shows and hosts and prognosticators, what do they say about what caused World War I? They go back to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand.
Right.
And you hear that all the time. But we pinpoint, and this is a book I'm hoping to publish soon. I really wanted to get it out during the centenary of the First World War. But the real roots of World War I had everything to do with Africa. The Berlin Conference was an attempt by Europeans to head off this war between them. There was a European civil war whose roots were in who was going to have access and control over the raw materials from Africa.
Right.
And so 1884, the Berlin Conference was simply an attempt for them to sit down as quote unquote gentlemen and to postpone, or at least to come to some agreement in terms over which they could then go out and to pummel and rape the continent. And so this are the roots of that war, World War II, and the war that is on the horizon, and even the war that we see here in this particular region. This is the root. And so if you don't address these things, if you don't go back and look at the root causes of these things, then you cannot find the solution to them. You cannot find and address the causative factors. And so we will say that it is not important about race, that race is a superficial element, that we all, it's a superficial thing, that melanatedness that we possess. It's superficial, that the garments that we see the brothers and sisters wearing in antiquity and in those ancient images, that's superficial. The hair texture, all those are superficial things. But nevertheless, that is at the foundation of the history of this region. And if you don't go back and acknowledge, if you don't acknowledge this at the root, then you can't move forward. it would be so easy for policymakers, for the diplomats and so forth to usher in a solution, to usher in a time of peace. Because Sadeek, the world is, they like to say the world is overpopulated. The world is not overpopulated. If anything, it's underpopulated. It might be overpopulated with the wrong people, wrong things, but in terms of the actual space on the planet that's available for us to settle and live in peace and harmony, there's plenty of land to go around. You see that when you fly out of any major city. You see land everywhere. But we've adopted this Eurocentric idea of city life being the preferred manner in which to organize ourselves, and it's chaotic. It's confusing. It's criminal in more ways than one. So this is what we've got to get back to. We've got to get back to the root cause. And Israel, just to give you an example again, and I'm not, again, Israel, Arabs, both of them might be angry with me at this, but Israel attempting, and it realizes that it cannot escape this awakening. It cannot escape this spotlight that's being shown on it. When Donald Trump said that he was going to move America's embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, to Israel's capital, it was like most people in the world had to sit back and say, well, I thought Jerusalem was Israel's capital. Why is it that the world doesn't recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital? And so the whole world's attention was being drawn where? To Jerusalem. In the last 2 years, year and a half, the young son, Master KG, down in South Africa, he's got a global hit it's past platinum. And he's talking about Jerusalem. And the lyrics are saying, Jerusalem, my home. He and a South African sister, she penned the lyrics, Jerusalem, my home. And everybody all over the world are dancing and singing to this song. So the spirit has turned the eyes and ears of the whole globe toward Jerusalem. And so you have brothers and sisters all over the world, be they Igbo, be they Yoruba, be they all across America, out of the black church. I just got a message from a pastor. I'd emailed him a few years ago, and he just recently, just 2 nights ago, sent me an email. He saw one of my interviews and said, hey, that's the brother that sent me an email. Took him a long time, but now we're in touch with each other. He knows we've got this information, and we can help fill in the blanks, because there's a mission that the children of Israel are to play prophetically. This is where I wanted to go, that ultimately it boils down to a mission. It's not just enough to say that that's my narrative, that's my claim. The question is, what do you do when you get here? And so there are prophecies that speak to this reality. We were told about the nation of Israel being a house of prayer, Jerusalem being a house of prayer for all nations. And it really the prophet Isaiah made it very clear, it ain't got nothing to do with the bloodline like that. So after all this fighting, after all this detailed research to connect us back to this land, I'm saying that don't matter. That's what I'm saying. It's all about your spirit. It's all about your purpose in life. It's about your mandate and mission. That's what it boils down to. And that transcends race. That transcends melanation. That transcends color. It's about what you're doing. And so as Africans are knocking literally on Israel's door via the asylum seekers who were pouring into the southern borders, over the last decade or so, they were not to be received as infiltrators. That was an improper prophetic way to receive them. And biblical scholars know this, That's not how we were as Israelites. That's not how we were to receive them. If Bibi Netanyahu wants a seat at the African Union, and he does, then he's got to know that you got to treat African people a little different. You can't make rulings that lock out millions of people of African ancestry who do have a legitimate cultural, historical, linguistic, genetic claim to this land. And so Israel is trying to figure out how they're going to do this. This is a report of the Public Advisory Committee for examining Israel's approach regarding worldwide communities with affinity to the Jewish people. Now, I don't like that terminology, affinity, because that's like, you hear our young sons out there playing basketball in front of my house here. Someone must, I assume you can hear that.
Yeah, tell them to go to bed. It's 11 o'clock at night. Like, what kind of house you running up there, man? It's, it's 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?
They got 10 more minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. Hallelujah. Okay, and 10 more minutes.
Most of them in that particular age group, they don't have school tomorrow, so they get a little later tonight, you know?
Oh, that's cool.
But that just let you know, under Israel's skies, our skies are filled with stars, not missiles, you know?
Oh, okay.
So,
all right. I'll take that.
But this terminology, affinity, it's like, oh, you associated with this psychological association or adaptation, adoption, conversion, anything but that we actually could be connected and tied into this land. And so they dance around, in the language, they dance around this idea, but they're trying to figure out how to accommodate this awakening and do it in a manner that doesn't pose demographic dynamite to them. We understand the fear, but it's a fear that they do need to overcome because we've given them no reason, it's irrational. It's an irrational fear. Africans all over the globe have never, had evil intentions, even when the tides have turned. South Africa, another example of Jerusalem. The people's attention being turned towards Jerusalem. The chief justice there, made a comment about he loves Jerusalem and he's commanded as a Christian to love Jerusalem. And so he was under attack by the Arabs there. And I had to come out and defend him, write a piece to defend his position and understand that, that's all that is understood. But it yet again was another example of how Jerusalem was being catapulted into the eyes of people globally, African people globally. And so when those eyes are turned here, who do they see here? They see me. They see this community thousand. They see these Afro-Palestinians that we've begun to talk about here. And if there's going to be peace in this region, Sadeek, then if the keys are to be found somewhere in the scriptural text, in the Hebraic text that was written in an African language, right, it's going to take some African decipherers. It's going to have to be interpreted from an African perspective. If we could be peaceful after all of the hardships of the civil rights struggle and slavery and so forth, if we could still emerge from that and not be wanting to tear down America, then certainly we qualify as peacemakers. If we could endure the hardships that we had to endure here in Israel for the first 25, 30 years of our existence here, and come out of that and be happy to bring this light and be a part of this process, this prophetic light unto the nations, if we could emerge from that, it goes back to what you said about Joseph. Because Joseph being sold into captivity by his brethren, it's written in the scriptures that says his brethren meant that for evil, but the Creator meant that for good. And so we're big enough to understand that there's a prophetic calling we had to endure whatever we had to endure. It had nothing to do with who put us in captivity. Whites didn't put us in captivity.
I love it.
It was a God It was a creative force. It was something that we did to incur a wrath that allowed that historical, and that's another discussion for another evening. But this is our charge, nevertheless. This is our charge, and we embrace it wholesomely.
Well,
we're the peacemakers. We're the peacemakers. We've got some keys that are going to need to be heard, that need to be brought at the table, and we're simply saying, give us a chance, help us to help you.
Minister Amadiel, I want to thank you for just, sitting with us today and elucidating on the history, the present situation, and the fact that we can rely on our brothers and sisters who have been there for decades, uncovering the history, working through not just the history of Northeastern Africa, but West Africa, East Africa, Central Africa, and how it all ties together, and the fact that it all boils down to not necessarily being about race, not necessarily about who's better than the other, but recognizing the historical underpinnings, and it points back to us and our responsibility on the planet. And I really appreciate you. Yeah, it comes back to truth, right? So as we acknowledge truth, we can break through the root causes, the barriers, and get at what is really ailing people across the planet. So I just want to say in Hebrew, Todah Rabbah, thank you to the highest level. And, wish you and your family a great evening and peace. We've got to wrap up. I've got less than a minute, but I want to do this. I want to shout out Cassiopeia, who actually chimed in. I don't know if she's still out there. We love you, Cassie, and the work you're doing with the Black Mall. Between Facebook Live and YouTube, we have people in from Zambia, South Africa, Israel, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Missouri, Indiana, California, and there's somebody in from Texas. So I just want to acknowledge, and that's just part of the audience that's watching us. And I want it not to be lost. I'm going to say this, and then we're going to get out of here, on the fact that no less than, I think, 11 days after issuing Black people letters to get out, this skirmish broke out. Because we talked about this, we talked about the letters on our show 2 weeks ago, and not 10 days later was there a war or a skirmish that broke out in Israel. So I just want to say that.
The head of my anointed, I believe.
So I just want to say that I don't want to, there's no coincidence. And that's a whole nother show in itself. So thank you, everybody. WIIFTBP audience, we love you out there. Ron, thank you. Mace Jackson, thank you. Zarakia, thanks for sitting in with me.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks,
and as always, as we say on the green side of things, peace.
WIIFTBP.
Hallelujah.